within, they hold me tight. In the dark, I lose my fight.
Chapter 7. Under the Moonlight. Cynthia sat on the couch, tucked between her two youngest children. A quiet smile played at her lips as the cartoons filled the living room with cheerful noise. Stephen, just 3, had a death grip on his juice cup. Johnny, 5, was bouncing a toy car against her knee, narrating its imaginary race with dramatic flair. Across the room, Kellyanne, now 12, sat curled up with a book, her legs tucked under her. She was quiet, focused, always a little apart, a little more grown. Cynthia watched her for a moment, heart full. Kellyanne had always been wise beyond her years. These were the moments Cynthia cherished, the ones that grounded her. Her gaze drifted past the kids and out the window. Her thoughts wandered to the life she'd built. Michael, her husband, was gone for the weekend on a race. He was a successful driver, sure, but he'd made his real living under the hood as a mechanic. He had a gift for bringing engines back to life, and a heart that never hesitated to do the same for people. He never once blinked about raising Kellyanne as his own. Never made Cynthia feel like her daughter was anything but theirs. It hadn't always been this peaceful, or this simple. Cynthia was raised by a couple who, in hindsight, were saints. At the time, she resented their rules, their protectiveness, their constant concern. But now, with kids of her own, and a husband who stood beside her every step of the way, she could finally see their love for what it was, deep, committed, and unshakably patient. They even helped raise Kellyanne when Cynthia was still learning how to be a mother. What once felt like judgment, she now understood, was care. And then, her thoughts drifted, as they often did, to her biological mother, Carla. That always left a tangle in her chest. There had been a brief, naive hope when she moved in with Carla and her stepfather, David. Her mother had seemed fun, a little wild maybe, but loving. That image shattered quickly. Once Cynthia was under her roof, Carla turned controlling, bitter, always needing to be the victim in every scenario. Cynthia only made it 4 months in Carla's house. She moved out the moment she turned 18. It wasn't a dramatic exit, just a quiet end to a chapter she'd hoped would be different. The tension, the mood swings, the control. It was too much. She never felt truly safe or heard there. But David was different. He was awkward sometimes. The kind of man who could make a teenage girl cringe with his corny jokes or mismatched shirts. But he was steady. He cared, even when he didn't know what to say. He didn't push, didn't shame. No matter the choices she made, David stayed the same, calm, present, a little weird, and completely loyal. She smiled, remembering him sitting white-knuckled in the passenger seat while she drove on her learner's permit. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 10 minutes, but he still let her drive again the next day. No one else would have dared. He even took her to rummage sales on weekends, just the two of them. He'd make it seem like she was doing him a favor, tagging along, like he was the lucky one. And maybe he really believed that. By the time she turned to drinking, Cynthia was already back living with her adoptive parents. It was quiet there. Too quiet sometimes. She'd stay in her room with the door closed, lost in her own darkness. In those moments, drunk, tearful, angry at the world or at herself, she'd call David, and David would be there, always, just as he'd promised. "I'll be there if you really need me," he'd told her once, and he was, in his quiet, dependable David kind of way. She got help, therapy, boundaries, reflection. She made sure to be nothing like Carla. She couldn't bear the idea of Kellyanne growing up with the same hollow ache she'd carried for so long, because that's what Carla left her with, a feeling of rejection. Not just once, but again and again. Carla never apologized, never owned her role. She spun things so thoroughly that Cynthia sometimes questioned her own memories. She'd accepted that Carla could be charming, even wonderful on the surface, but not someone she could trust, not someone who could care for her in the way she needed. Maybe one day Carla would get help. Maybe. But for now, Cynthia had her own family, a good man, a warm home, a second chance to give her kids what she once took for granted. And that was enough. She looked at her kids again. Johnny was now climbing onto the couch arm like a squirrel. Stephen was trying to put a sock on his hand, and Kellyanne, across the room, had quietly slipped her hand out from under her book and rested it on the arm of the couch. Calm, observant, still a child, but growing fast. Cynthia watched her for a moment longer, her heart quiet. This was it. The thing her parents tried to give her. The thing she once resented. Now, she finally understood. Cynthia had no idea what Michael was up to. He'd told her to wear something special. Nothing crazy, he said, but something you love in the mirror. That alone stirred butterflies. Then she saw the bouquet on the kitchen counter, roses and wildflowers. Her favorite. The babysitter was already there, smiling knowingly as she handed over her coat. Michael waited by the car, unusually sharp in a collared shirt and that smirk she'd fallen in love with. As they drove, he talked about his day, a co-worker who fixed things that didn't need fixing, a last-minute schedule change that nearly ruined his week. But underneath the words, something was off. His fingers tapped the steering wheel too much. His eyes kept flicking her way like he was bracing for something big. She didn't press. He'd talk when he was ready. The restaurant was one of her favorites. Candlelit tables, warm wood decor, a menu that made her feel both pampered and at home. She blinked in surprise when he opened her door and kissed her hand. It felt like a dream. Over dinner, he barely ate. She teased him. He waved it off. "I'm just enjoying watching you," he said. His foot tapped under the table. After the meal, he asked if she wanted dessert. She shook her head, glowing. That's when he stood and offered her his hand. "I want to take you somewhere." They drove out past town, down a familiar dirt road, the place where he first kissed her, where they used to park and talk like teenagers who had all the time in the world. Tonight, the stars looked impossibly bright. The moon hung full above the trees. Soft light spilled across the field. She felt safe, full, like nothing else mattered. Then Michael started talking. "Do you remember how we met?" She did. She always did. But she let his voice become a hum while her eyes wandered. Her version was simple. She saw him across a parking lot and just knew. Love at first sight. A soul-level knowing. His version, nervous rambling, thinking she was out of his league, always made her laugh. Then, silence. She turned. Michael was on one knee. A small box sat open in his hand. A ring caught the moonlight. Her breath caught. She froze. He gave her that boyish grin. "You never did fully listen to me," he said, voice trembling just enough. "I said, will you marry me?" She covered her mouth with her hand. Tears welled up instantly. She shook her head, not to say no, but to believe it. Then she launched herself into his arms, nearly knocking him over. "Yes," she sobbed. "Yes, yes, yes." Later, he tried to take her to the movie she'd been dying to see, but she shook her head, still glowing. "Let's just go home." She couldn't wait to tell the kids. That night, they all piled into one bed, even though it was far too small. Kellyanne practically laid on top of Michael. Cynthia curled beside them, barely able to hold his hand between Kellyanne's limbs. He looked happy. Well, that's what he gets for waiting so long. She kept replaying the moment they told the kids. Kellyanne's squeal, Johnny's confusion, Stephen trying to say married with toddler sounds, and Kellyanne's face lit up with joy. That made Cynthia cry all over again. She had everything she ever wanted. A few days later, she was tidying the bedroom. She opened the drawer where the ring box had been tucked away. She hadn't planned to look at it again. But something drew her. Inside, barely hidden under the satin lining, was a folded piece of paper. It smelled faintly of motor oil and thyme. Michael's handwriting, "I'm sorry I didn't ask you sooner. It's not because I didn't want to. It's just that last night was the first time I felt you were ready. Something changed in your eyes. It felt like the soul I've always known finally reached back for me. I've had this ring since before Johnny was born. It was always yours. Always. M." Cynthia sat on the edge of the bed, the letter trembling in her hands. He had waited. Through her healing, through her darkness, through everything. The ring wasn't a prize. It was a promise he'd made in silence years ago. She folded the note and tucked it back beneath the satin. She never told him she found it. Just one secret. Hers. Sacred. Safe.
Maybe that's what real love is. Not roses or rings or perfect plans, but a quiet man with patient hands and the courage to understand. You waited for me. You knew I would bloom when the shadows gave way to a little more room. And now that I'm here, so fully, so free, I'm not just yours, I'm finding me, because you waited for me under the moon.